is an interest in the ancient world. In Italy, all you had to do was look around at the ancient ruins and understand how great man had been in the ancient world. It was all there. If we could imitate that building, if we could take the principles of that building and apply it to our buildings, then we'd have something really remarkable.
But when the Black Death struck Europe in 1347, Florence was not immune. Practically half the city's population was wiped out. It would take the region more than half a century to recover. But it would be a recovery like no other the world had ever seen. It was called the Renaissance, which means literally rebirth or revival. Throughout Tuscany, an elite patron class of super-rich families would wield their private fortunes to commission magnificent projects to work for the people.
There is an appetite among those who survive to enjoy life, to do other things, to understand or to sense that the life is to be exploited in some way for those who are alive.
The Medicis of Florence, one of the wealthiest families in Italy, would lead the way in regaining the glory that had been Rome, restoring it in Florence and transforming the city into the new Athens.
The structure of patronage has changed. Patrons are using artists and architects to celebrate themselves.
The centerpiece of this effort would be the cathedral in the heart of Florence.
They've never seen a structure that looks like the one they want to build. Right? That's a matter of ambition, of idea.
See that big old church behind me with that scaffolding on it? It's called Santa Maria del Fiore, otherwise known as the Duomo, or Cathedral of Florence. It was built by a guy named Arnolfo da Cambio around 1200s, but you know what? He was dead before it was ever finished. Arnolfo intended for the church to have a dome, but he's dead, so the church stands for a whole bunch of decades without any dome on it at all. Finally, in the 1400s, it's left up to a guy wearing a real genius suit named Filippo Brunelleschi to not only change the entire idea of building to become an architect, but to make the entire field of architecture a design.
Brunelleschi had grown up in a middle-class family and was expected to become a government bureaucrat like his father. But Brunelleschi was interested in design and first became a master goldsmith.
It's only in his early 30s that he then moved over and began to become what we now call an architect.
Now, Brunelleschi is a maverick and he's brash. His dad is a notary. Brunelleschi wants to study sculpture. Wonder how his dad reacted to that one, huh? Probably like my old man reacted when I told him I wanted to go to New York and become an actor. In any case, by his early 20s, Brunelleschi is a pretty fair goldsmith. Now, in 1401, the baptistry decides it wants to replace its doors, so they hold a competition. Competition comes down to two guys, Brunelleschi and the international Gothic man of the hour, Lorenzo Ghiberti. Brunelleschi was pretty good, but he ain't no Ghiberti. Ghiberti wins. Brunelleschi runs away with his tail between his legs, humiliated in defeat.
He loses the competition to Ghiberti in 1401. And it sets up the kind of perfect opportunity for him to leave the city of Florence, then go to Rome and study the secrets of the ancients.
Brunelleschi may have spent nearly 2 decades studying in Rome, examining the most important structures of great Roman engineering.
Renaissance Italians are fascinated with the way Romans did everything, the way things were done in ancient Rome, and building is no exception. A big part of the enterprise of Renaissance engineering is recovering this ancient knowledge.
One structure in particular may have had a lasting impression on the young Brunelleschi: the Pantheon. Had the Romans found a way to build it without complex wooden scaffolding supporting it? Over those 2 painstaking decades, he may have examined every inch of that dome, which spanned 142 feet, struggling to unlock the secrets of its construction. When Brunelleschi returned to Florence, he could have brought with him the secrets of Roman dome construction.
It seems that Brunelleschi reappears in Florence just at the time that the Opera of the cathedral was in fact planning on this competition for the design of the dome. The cathedral was to be, upon completion, the largest church in all of Christianity.
It would be one of the greatest construction challenges Italy had ever seen.
They were building it large to sort of show the world exactly how important this city was on all levels. The problem is that they were setting themselves up for a big fall.
Unlike the other architects, Brunelleschi boldly proposed a method that would earn him ridicule. He designed a dome without the traditional use of flying buttresses, wooden supports, and internal scaffolding.
General public opinion was that Brunelleschi had gone very simply mad. They also began to realize that no one else have any clearer picture of how to pull this thing off, and so they began gradually to sort of heed his words.
Brunelleschi managed to win over the judges with his unique design, but much to his dismay, the commission would come with one infuriating stipulation.
It seems that fate would rear its ugly head because he would have to share that role with his nemesis, Lorenzo Ghiberti.
With many convinced his design would never work, Brunelleschi would not only have to design his great dome, he would have to engineer his rival's defeat as well. On August 7, 1420, with Brunelleschi hovering over every detail, construction of the Great Dome finally began.
What Brunelleschi decides to do is to construct not one dome, but 2. Okay? A dome within a dome.
When standing inside the cathedral, people would be able to take in the beautifully decorated internal dome. But from the outside, the second dome would have a more functional purpose.
He would use that second shell to protect the inner dome from rain, but at the same time to make the entire structure look more gonfia et magnifica, more swollen and magnificent.
To give the shells a structural foundation, marble ribs would be installed for every angle of the octagonal dome. Then, rows of arches would be built to intersect the ribs at 90-degree angles. But Brunelleschi faced one enormous logistical problem: finding a way to lift several tons of material up to heights of more than 200 feet.
And so Brunelleschi devises something we call the ox hoist.
Oxen yoked to a tiller turned a vertical shaft to raise or lower the hoist. The stroke of genius was a screw that changed gears from forward to reverse and the direction from up or down. This meant the oxen didn't need to be taken out of the harness and spun around. They could keep walking in the same direction to both raise and lower the hoist, a saving of literally hours every day. By the end of the project, it would lift an estimated 70 million pounds. But the material that had been so carefully lifted still had to be moved laterally and then perfectly placed hundreds of feet in the air. To accomplish this seemingly impossible feat, Brunelleschi designed a second entirely new kind of hoist called a castello.
The castello was a crane that they used to move weights horizontally.
Perched high on the cupola and resembling a gallows, it used a crossbeam and counterweight system, allowing builders to place material with millimetrical precision.
These are the machines that he was producing, and these are the machines that made it possible for such a dome to have been built.
But all of this creative thinking still didn't solve the fundamental challenge of constructing such an expansive dome with no internal support. Brunelleschi would still need to figure out how to prevent it from collapsing. It would demand his greatest leap of imagination yet, combined with a lot of hardcore calculation. Brunelleschi was granted the first modern patent for his invention of a river transport vessel. (1420), Florence, Italy. The visionary architect and engineer Filippo Brunelleschi has been commissioned to construct the most magnificent dome in the world, the cupola at Santa Maria del Fiore. But first, he will need to prevent it from crumbling to the ground without supports.
Now, it's one thing to invent a clutch and a flywheel, and you got the donkey only going in one direction, saves a lot of time, and then you invent a crane, it brings the stuff up high. But the more important question is, I'm standing on top of this dome, and how did Brunelleschi keep this sucker from caving in?
He would have to find a way to keep the bricks in place and support the bed joints of the masonry. The solution? An ingenious bricklaying technique that relied on careful angles, placement, and friction.
Brunelleschi comes up with this invention, if you will, from Rome, which they use decoratively, but we don't know that they used it functionally, of herringbone bricks. You have a short brick here that's sort of bookended by two long bricks, and subsequently you have weight coming down, then weight coming down, and then weight coming across, and then weight coming down, and then weight coming across. The whole point of it is that a herringbone pattern will displace the weight out and down instead of just directly down where you might have a collapse of your dome.
To solve the opposite problem of bricks bursting outward, Brunelleschi laid a set of chains horizontally around the octagonal circumference of the dome.
They were going to construct these so-called catene, or these horizontal chains that were intended to maintain the hoop stress or the lateral thrust of the dome.
5 chains were to be interlocked at regular intervals to support the dome and serve as invisible buttressing.